Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of Number 4 Privet Drive liked flexing that they were very basic, thank you. TBH, they were the last people you think would be sus because they were all fax, no printer. Mr. Dursley was adulting at a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a dummy thick, with 3 C's, man with hardly any neck, although he had an absolute unit of a mustache. Mrs. Dursley was a total Karen, with 0 chill and had hella neck, which came in very useful when she was stalking her neighbors and not minding her own. The Dursleys had a future incel of a son named Dudley, who they thought was the main character. The Dursleys were mostly thriving, but they also had low-key tea, which didn't pass the vibe check, and their greatest fear was to get called out and cancelled. They were girl-bossing too close to the sun and didn't think their clout could bounce back if their femme, the Potters, were revealed. MILF Lily Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sis, but Mrs. D had gone ghost. IRL, no cap, Mrs. D fronted she didn't have a sis, because Lil and her deadbeat mans were straight up cringe. If the neighbors ever peeped the Potters, it'd be a big yikes. Low-key, the Dursleys knew the Potters had their own crotch goblin too, but they'd never peeped. This baby was FR a solid reason to keep the in-laws yoked. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a gross being like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull gray, fight me, Tuesday, our lore opens. The cloudy overlay didn't vibe like strange and mysterious things would be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley slipped the tea as she was trying to put a screaming Dudley into his heckin' high chair. None of them noticed. A chunky, tawny owl fluttered past the window. At 8:30, the chunk lord, that is Mr. Dursley, picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was losing it and yeeted his cereal at the walls. "Little lad," chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his whip and backed out into the driveway of their basic ASF house. It was on that one edge of the street that you feel like you could accidentally hit the elbow of your car on that he noticed something sus. A cat, popping off and reading a map. For a sec, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he'd seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a chunking tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't the map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? He must have accidentally picked up one of Mrs. Dursley's edibles that morning. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the chunking cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the jonkers in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Period. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the jonkers out of his thinking organ. As he drove toward the town, he had no thonks. Head empty, except for some drills he had to sell. Let's get this LOAF, he thought. But on the edge of town, drills were yeeted out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the morning traffic jam starter pack, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of not very shady at all people about. People in cloaks. No cap. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in chuggy clothes. The get-ups you saw on young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be a boomer, and wearing an emerald green cloak. The audacity of him. But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. A TikTok, props. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in a Grunnings parking lot, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window, in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owls popping off in broad daylight, though people down the street did. They pointed and gazed diseased as owl after owl sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at nighttime. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal, owl-free morning. He had no chill and yelled at 5 different people. He made several important phone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the bakery. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the Starbucks. He took a big look at them, with unhappy as he passed. He didn't know why, but they seemed kinda sus. This bunch were whispering excitedly, too, and he couldn't see a single GoFundMe donation tin. It was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters. That's right. That's what I heard. Bet. Their boy, Harry. Mr. Dursley felt like he'd been ratioed IRL. He looked back at the whisperers and wondered if he should at them, but thought better of it. Even a girl boss has his weak moments. And anyway, there were plenty of people called Potter with moods called Harry. There was no point in worrying his discard kitten. Her sister was on both their DNI lists. During that day, emo thoughts kept dabbing across Mr. Dursley's mind. He later left the building and nearly sister slammed into someone just outside his door. "Nor," he grunted as the man nearly fell. However, he didn't seem triggered at all. Instead, the funky little dude pressed the slay button. "So true, bestie. Even muggles like you should slay today. Even the sussiest of buckas has been cancelled. At last." And then the old man hugged Mr. Dursley, real, and headed off. Mr. Dursley couldn't even find it in him to, "Yeah, Fortnite 10K, we're about to go down, baby." He hurried to his car, and the Fast and the Furious Tokyo drifted straight home. As he pulled into the driveway, the first thing his sister saw was the same chunk cat he'd seen in the morning, sitting on the wall. "POV? You're on my TNI list." Mr. Dursley spat at the cat as he walked inside. His girly pop's day was swag ASF. Dudley had learned to say nor, just like his bestie, cooed Mrs. Dursley. When his fave oomph finally went AFK, Mr. Dursley went to the living room to watch some news. Last thing. Birders everywhere are fighting for their lives right now. Them hooters hunt at night and avoid sunlight like nerds, but for some reason, they've been invading our skies since sunrise. The science isn't sciencing. The newscaster smirked. Weird AF, bro. Now, Jim McGuffin, what that weather do, boy? Any more owl showers tonight? Say less, Ted, said the weatherman. TBH IDK, but the burbs aren't the only weird mullet daddies today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been tweeting that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, the sky is having shooting stars. Maybe they're celebrating bonfire night early. It will actually rain tonight, though, but it's about to be raining hands if MFs don't stop calling about these damn birds. Mr. Dursley 404 errored in his armchair. Shooting stars? Owls waking up and choosing violence? Sus boomers dressed in Ren Fair outfits and spilling tea about the Potters. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He'd have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Petunia? My cotton swab? You haven't heard from your sis of late, maybe? As he had expected, Mrs. Dursley looked like she ate a lemon. After all, they ghosted her sis. Nope, she said sharply. Why? Cringy crap on the news, Mr. Dursley mumbled. Owls, shooting stars, and there were a lot of edgelords in town today. And? Snapped Mrs. Dursley. Well, I just thought maybe it was something to do with, her crew. Mrs. Dursley sipped her tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared to tell her that he'd heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said as casually as he could, "They're crotch cobbling. He'd be about Dudley's age now, wouldn't he?" Props, huffed Mrs. Dursley. What's his name again? Howard, isn't it? Harry. Nasty, cringe name, if you ask me. Oh, yeah. Mr. Dursley's feels felt punched. Legit. He decided to shut the fuck up, and they went upstairs to catch some Z's. While Mrs. Dursley took off her face, Mr. Dursley lurked in the bedroom window overlooking the front garden. The floof was still there. It was staring down Privet Drive as though it were waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could all this have anything to do with the Potters? If it did, if it got out that they were related to a pair of, they would totes be cancelled. The Dursleys got into bed. Mrs. Dursley crashed, but Mr. Dursley couldn't shake the intrusive thoughts. Finally, he comforted himself that if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to invade the Dursley space. The Potters knew very well that he and his bae thought they were cringe and wanted nothing to do with their shenanigans. He couldn't see how they could get all up in his business. They were props safe and out of the way. Ha ha ha. Nope. Mr. Dursley was drifting off uneasily, but the floof outside was on high alert. Like a fuzzy statue with penetrating eyes, it stared unblinkingly at the far corner of Privet Drive. It showed superb chill as the world happened around it. An ancient man appeared on a corner the cat had been protect on Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old, with a boss beard long enough to tuck into his belt. He was slaying in his long robes, a purple cloak that swept the ground, and high-heeled buckled boots. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his hunker was long and crooked, as though he had been punched in the face before. "This ya boy, Albus Dumbledore," Albus Dumbledore was super chill about the fact that he wasn't wanted on this street. He was busy doing a self-body cavity search until he felt the gaze of the kiddo. He chuckled and muttered, "I should have known." He found his query, a silver cigarette lighter, flicked it open and clicked it. R.I.P. the nearest street lamp. Yeah boy got click happy and plunged the street into darkness. Now the nosy Nancy neighbors could see nothing on the block. The old man waltzed down the street to chill with the cat. "Sup, Prof. McGonagall?" He turned to smile at the tabby, who was now a human with the air of a CEO serious businesswoman. She'd be wearing square glasses, exactly the shape of the markings on the cat. Her look was on fleek, with an emerald green cloak and black hair in a tight bun. "How did you know it was me?" she asked. "Prof, cats don't look like they blanking." "Brick walls aren't comfy." "Why you no party?" "There are like a dozen dank bangers I passed getting here." Prof. McGonagall sniffed angrily. "Oh, yes, everyone's celebrating all right. High-key muggles noticed. It was on their idiot box. Flocks of burbs, shooting stars. Muggles have eyes. Shooting stars down in Kent. But that was that old Diggle. Smooth brain." "You can't blame them," Dumbledore cooed. "This ball has been like 2020 for 11 years. "Bet," said Prof. McGee irritably. "But there's no reason to lose our chill. People be like herb turb strutting like peacocks in broad daylight, not even dressed in muggle swag. Sipping tea." She threw a sharp, sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something, but he didn't, so she went on. "A fine thing it would be if, on the very day you-know-who kicked rocks, the muggles found out about us all. Did we really take a W?" "Bet," said Dumbledore. "We have so much to be thankful for. Want a lemon drop?" "WDF?" "A lemon drop? Muggle candy that is dank?" "Nope." Prof. McGee initiated Ice Queen mode. "Even if you-know-who has stepped off. Girl, names are a thing. That trash is called Voldemort." Prof. McGee flinched, but Homeboy was unsticking lemon drops and gave no fucks. "Chillax. It's just a name." "Bet." Prof. McGee was exasperated, but eyeing Dumbledore like a snack. "But you're the only one who could make Voldemort salty." "Flattery will get you everywhere. Voldemort did have moves, though," Dumbledore said calmly. "Far you do too, but you don't flex." "You make me blush." Prof. McGee shot Dumbledore a sharp look and said, "The burbs are nothing next to this tea they be sippin'. Legit, what they said has me shook." Prof. McGee had obviously got the tea she was most hyped to spill, the real reason she had been vibing on a cold, hard wall all day, for neither as a floof nor as a woman had she looked as high-key invested as she did now. It was obvious that whatever everyone was saying, she wasn't going to buy it until Dumbledore told her there was no cap. Homeboy, however, was choosing another lemon drop and didn't answer. "What they are saying," she pressed on, "is that last night Voldemort spawned in Godric's Hollow. He went to find the Potters, and that he unalived Lily and James Potter. Dumbledore said it. Prof. McGee gasped. Lily and James? What the heck? I can't even. Oh, Albus. Dumbledore reached out and patted her on the shoulder. I'm shook too. Professor McGonagall's voice was shook as she went on. That's not all. They are saying he tried to unalive their son, Harry Potter, but he took an L and his power broke, and that's why he's gone. Dumbledore nodded glumly. Legit, faltered Professor McGonagall. After all he's done, he failed to unalive a baby, and as a mage, how did Harry survive? We can only guess, said Dumbledore. We may never know. Prof. McGee wiped her eyes and got out her hand sanitizer. Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a buzzing watch from his pocket and checked it. It was a very sus watch. It had 12 hands but no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around the edge. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, though, because he put it back in his pocket and said, Hagrid's late. I bet he's the one who told you I'd be here. BTW. Bet, said Prof. McGee. And I don't suppose you're gonna tell me why you're here of all places? I've come to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. They're the only fam he has left now. You don't mean... You can't mean these Karens? Cried Professor McGee, jumping to her feet and pointing at number 4. Dumbledore? You can't. I've been watching them all day. These basic fools aren't in the same WhatsApp group. And their spawn. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry Potter come and live here? Cope. That's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he's older. I've written them a letter. A letter? Repeated Prof. McGee faintly, sitting down on a wall. For real, Dumbledore, you think you can explain all this in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous, legendary. I wouldn't be shook if today was known as Harry Potter Day in the future. There will be books written about Harry. Every child in the world will know his name. Bet, said Dumbledore, looking super serious through his specs. It would be enough to go to anyone's head. An influencer before he can walk and talk. Famous for something he won't even remember. Can't you see how much better off he'll be growing up away from all that until he's ready to take it? Prof. McGee made fish faces like she was gonna say something, but thought better. She composed herself, then said, Bet. IKR. But how is the boy getting here, Dumbledore? She eyed his cloak suddenly, as though she thought he was transporting the baby. Hagrid's bringing him. You think it big brain to trust Hagrid with something as important as this? I would trust Hagrid with my life, said Dumbledore. His heart is GOAT, said Prof. McGee grudgingly, but you can't pretend he's not an airhead. He does tend to... What was that? A room sound broke the silence around them. It grew steadily louder as they looked up and down the street for some sign of a headlight. It swelled to a roar as they both looked up at the sky. A huge motorcycle fell out of the air and landed on the road in front of them. If the motorcycle was huge, it was nothing compared to the beast of a man straddling it. He was almost twice as tall as a normal man and had some major BDE, big dick energy. His fluffy factor was a oh hell no, and so wild. Long tangles of bushy black hair and beard hid most of his face. He had hands the size of hubcaps, and his feet, in their leather boots, were like baby dolphins. In his vast, muscular arms, he was holding a bundle of blankets. "Hagrid," said Dumbledore, sounding relieved. "Finally. Where did you get the ride?" "Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore, sir," said the giant, gently disembarking from the bike. "Young Sirius Black lent it to me. I've got him, sir." "Any issues?" "Nope. House was almost destroyed, but I got him out all right before the muggles started swarming around. He took a napper as we was flying over Bristol." Dumbledore and Professor McGee bent forward over the bundle of blankets. Inside, just visible, was the baben, sleeping. Under a tuft of jet black hair over his forehead, they could see a sus AF cut, shaped like a bolt of lightning. "Is that where?" whispered Prof. McGee. "Bet," said Dumbledore. "He'll have that scar forever." "Can't you fix it, Dumbledore?" "Yeah, but no. Scars come in handy. I have one on my knee. That is, totes a map of the London Underground." "Well, gimme, Hagrid. Let's get this over with." Dumbledore took Harry in his arms and turned toward the Dursleys' house. "Could I say bye to him, sir?" asked Hagrid. He bent his great, shaggy head over Harry and gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whiskery kiss. Then suddenly, Hagrid let out a noise like a wounded pupper. "STFU!" hissed Professor McGee. "You'll wake up the normies." "So sorry," sobbed Hagrid, taking out a large spotted handkerchief and burying his face in it. "I can't stand it. Lily, James unalived, and poor little Harry after living with muggles." Yeah, tragic. But control yourself, Hagrid, or we'll be found," Prof. McGee whispered, patting Hagrid gently on the arm as Dumbledore stepped over the low garden wall and walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep, took a letter out of his cloak, tucked it inside Harry's blankets, and then came back to the other two. For a full minute, the three of them stood and looked at the little bundle. Hagrid's shoulders shook, Prof. McGee blinked furiously, and the twinkling light that usually shone from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out. "Welp," said Dumbledore finally. "That's that. Time to dip. We may as well go party hardy." "Yeah," said Hagrid in a very muffled voice. "Gonna give Sirius back his right. Good night, Prof. McGee. Professor Dumbledore, sir." Wiping his streaming eyes on his jacket sleeve, Hagrid swung himself onto the motorcycle and kicked the engine into life. With a roar, it rose into the air and off into the night. "See ya soon, G," said Dumbledore, nodding to her. Prof. McGee blew her nose in reply. Dumbledore walked off into the night. On the corner he stopped and took out the silver put-outer. He clicked it once, and 12 balls of light sped back to their street lamps so that Privet Drive glowed suddenly orange, and he could make out a tabby cat slinking around the corner at the other end of the street. He could see just a bundle of blankets on the step of number 4. "Gee-eye, Harry," he murmured. He spun on his heel, swished his cloak, and vanished into the night. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive. Super basic, even under the stars. The very last place you would expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter cuddled up inside his blankies, sleeping soundly. One small hand closed on the ladder beside him, and he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He couldn't know that at this very moment, peeps meeting in secret all over the county, getting lit and saying in hushed voices, "To Harry Potter, the boy who wasn't unalived." It was like an eternity, like 10 years since the Dursleys had woken up to find their baby nephew on the front step, but Privet Drive was still super basic. The sun revealed the same front garden and shiny brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into their living room, which was almost identical to the night when Mr. Dursley saw the fateful news report about them Hooterburbs. Only the pics on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pics of what looked like a chunky ball wearing different colored bonnets. But Dudley Dursley had the worst glow-up ever. And now the pics showed a chunky blonde boy riding his first bicycle on a carousel at the fair, playing Among Us with his dad, being XOXO'd by his mom. The room low-key didn't show that another boy lived in the house too. Yet Harry Potter was still there, catching Z's at the moment, but not for long. His Aunt Petunia was awake and shrieked in her Karen voice for the first noise of the day. "Up! Get up! Now!" Harry woke with a start. His aunt tapped on the door again. "Up!" she screeched. Harry heard her trotting towards the kitchen, and then the sound of a frying pan being put on the stove. He rolled on his back and tried to remember the dream he had been having. It was sick. There had been a flying motorcycle in it. It totes felt like deja vu. His aunt teleported back outside the door. "Are you up yet?" she demanded. "Kinda," said Harry. "No cap. You need to look after the bacon. And don't you dare let it burn. I want everything Gucci on Duddy's B-Day." Harry groaned. "So done." "What did you say?" his aunt snapped through the door. Nothing. Dudley's B-Day. How could he have forgotten? Harry slowly unstuck himself from his bed and started hunting for socks. He found a pair under his bed and, after yoinking a spider off one of them, put them on. Harry was used to spiders because the dusty-ass cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was his zone. Once clothed, he skirted his way down the hall into the kitchen. The table was small beneath all Dudley's B-Day gifts. It looked as though Dudley had gotten the new grown book he wanted, not to mention the second television and the racing bike. Harry was confused as to why Dudley wanted a racing bike, as Dudley was a big hacking junker and hated games. Unless, of course, it involved throwing hands. Dudley's fave punching bag was Harry, but he couldn't often catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was speedy AF. Probably had something to do with living in a duddy cupboard. But Harry had always been small and scrawny for his age. He looked the farthest from swole because all his fits were second-hand clothes of Dudley's, and Dudley was 4-ish times as thick as him. Harry had a gangly face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes, like Harry Styles. He wore circle glasses held together with a lot of scotch tape, busy of all the times he had caught Dudley's hands with his face. The only thing Harry liked about his look was a very thin scar on his forehead that was shaped like a bolt of lightning. He had had it as long as he could remember, and thought it gave main character energy. Since his life was uninteresting ASF, the first question he could ever remember asking his Aunt Petunia was how he had gotten it. "When your parents wrecked your whip and unalived," she had said, "and don't be asking questions." Don't ask questions. That was the numero uno rule for living a basic life with the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon vented in the kitchen as Harry was flipping the bacon. "Comb your hair," he barked, by way of a morning greeting. About once a week, Uncle Vernon peeped over the top of his tablet and shouted that Harry needed a new do. Harry's probably had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class together, but his hair didn't give a fuck and simply grew that way, like an over-fertilized chia pet. Harry was frying eggs by the time Dudley vented in the kitchen with his birther. Dudley was a mini-me of Uncle Vernon. He had a chunky, pink face, hardly any neck, small, watery blue eyes, and lots of blonde hair that lay flat upon his fugly head. Aunt Petunia often said that Dudley looked like a BB angel. Harry often said that he looked like a rejected, plus-size Cabbage Patch doll. Harry put the feast of eggs and bacon on the table, which was super hexagon hard, BC there wasn't much room. Dudley, meanwhile, was counting his presents. His privileged face fell. 36, he mathed, looking up at his mother and father. "That's 2 less than last year." "Bay, you haven't counted Auntie March's present. Cop a look. It's here under this big one from Mommy and Daddy." "All right, 37 then," said Dudley, color changing to bright red. Harry, who was catching vibes of a huge Dudley bitch fit coming on, began chugging down his bacon as fast as possible in case Dudley yeeted the table over. Aunt Petunia saw the red flags too, because she said quickly, "And we'll cup you another 2 presents while we're chilling today. How's that, cutie? 2 more gifts. Is that right?" Dudley strained as the wheels turned in his head, ever so slowly. "So I'll have 39 home slice," said Aunt Petunia. "Oh." Dudley flopped down in a chair and grabbed the nearest present. "All right, then." Uncle Vernon chuckled. "LOL. Little dude just wants to get his dough's worth, just like his pop. That's my boy, Dudley." He ruffled Dudley's hair. At that moment, the telephone went brr, and Aunt Petunia went to answer it, while Harry and Uncle Vernon watched Dudley unwrap the racing bike, a video camera, a drone, 16 new computer games, and a Blu-ray player. He was ripping the paper off a gold wristwatch when Aunt Petunia came back from the telephone, looking like somebody peed in her cornflakes. "Shitty news, Vernon," she said. "Mrs. Figg's clumsy ass broken her leg. She can't take him." She jerked her head in Harry's direction. Dudley's mouth fell open in horror, but Harry's heart did a ziggy. Every year, on Dudley's B-Day, his parentals took him and a homeboy out for the day to totes awesome adventure parks, bougie restaurants, or the dope movies. Every year, Harry was left behind with Mrs. F, a crazy old bat who lived 2 streets away. Harry hated it there. The whole house had a butt-breath smell of cabbage, and Mrs. F made him look at pics of all the kitties she'd ever hosted. "Now what?" said Aunt Petunia, looking furiously at Harry as though he had schemed the whole thing. Harry knew he ought to give a shit that Mrs. Figg's leg was broke, but it wasn't easy when he reminded himself that it would be a whole ass year before he had to look at Tibbles, Snowy, Mr. Paws, and Tufty again. "We could hit up Marge," Uncle Vernon suggested. "You're kidding, right? She hates the boy. The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there. Or rather, as though he was something cringe that couldn't understand them. Like a slug. What about... what's her face? Yeah, your homie? Yvonne. On vacay. In Majorca, snapped Aunt Petunia. You could just dip and leave me here, Harry put in hopefully. He'd be able to watch what he wanted on Netflix for a change, and maybe even troll the forums on Dudley's grown book. Aunt Petunia looked as though she just swallowed a whole bag of sour Skittles. And come back and find a house in ruins? She bitched. I won't fuck up the house, said Harry, but they were boycotting him. IG, we could take him to the zoo, said Aunt Petunia slowly, and lock him in the car. That's my new whip. He ain't gonna chill in it alone. Dudley began to wail. Fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been literally forever since he had felt in real-life emotions. But he knew if he screwed up his face and made unhappy noises, his birth giver would give him anything he wanted. Danny Duddy-Dums, don't cry. Mommy won't let him unbomb your bomb diggity-day, she cried, flinging her arms around him. I don't want him to come, Dudley gasped for air between huge pretend sobs. He always spoils everything. He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Just then, the ding-dong rang. Oh, for fuck's sake, they're here, said Aunt Petunia frantically, and a sec later, Dudley's BFF, Pierce Polkiss, walked in with his mom. Pierce was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs, while Dudley cashed them outside. Dudley stopped bullshitting crying at once. Half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dursleys' car with Pierce and Dudley on the way to the zoo for the first time in his life. His aunt and uncle hadn't been able to big-brain anything else to do with him, but before they'd left, Uncle Vernon had snatched Harry aside. I'm warning you, he had said, putting his large purple face all up in Harry's grill. I'm warning you now, boy. Any sus business, anything at all, and you'll be in that cupboard from now until Christmas. I'm not gonna do anything, bro, said Harry. Legit. But Uncle Vernon wasn't about to be bamboozled, and didn't believe him. No one ever did. The prob was, weird shit often happened around Harry, and it was no good telling the Dursleys he dead-ass didn't do things. Once, Aunt Petunia, tired AF of Harry coming back from Great Clips, looking as though he hadn't been there at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short he was almost a full cue ball, except for his bangs, which she left to hide that cringe disfigurement. Dudley had LMAO'd at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he was already razzed for his lack of style. Next morning, albeit, he had gotten up to find his stew exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. He had been given a week in his cupboard for this, even though he had tried to explain that he didn't fucking know how it had grown back so quickly. Not cool. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into a highness-ass old sweater of Dudley's, brown, with orange puff balls. The harder she tried to pull it over his head, the smaller it became, until it would probably fit a Barbie doll, but certainly wouldn't be Harry's strip. Aunt Petunia decided it must have shrunk in the wash, and to his swell relief, Harry didn't have to take the heat. On the other hand, he'd gotten into deep shit for being found on a roof of the school kitchens. Dudley's gang had been chasing him, as usual, As much to Harry's gee whiz as anyone else's, there he was, vibin' on the chimney. The Dursleys received a very salty letter from Harry's headmistress, straight up snitching to them that Harry had been parkouring school buildings. But all he tried to do, as he popped off at Uncle Vernon through the locked door of his cupboard, was jump behind the big trash cans outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have snatched him up mid-jump. But today, nada was gonna go to shit. It was even worth being with Dudley and Pierce to be spending the day somewhere that wasn't school, his cupboard, or Mrs. Fig's cabbage-smelling living room. While he roomed, Uncle Vernon bitched to Aunt Petunia. He liked to bitch about things. People at work, Harry, the council, the bank, and Harry were just a few of his fave subjects. This morning, it was motorcycles. Roaring along like rackheads, the young gangsters, he said as a motorcycle overtook them. I had a dream about a motorcycle, said Harry, remembering it suddenly. It was flying. Uncle Vernon nearly sideswept into the car in front. He whipped right around in his seat and yelled at Harry, his face like a giant beet with a mustache. Motorcycles don't fly, dude. Dudley and Pierce were laughing their asses off. LOL, I know they don't, said Harry. It was only a dream. Big yikes. He wished he had SDFU. If there was one thing the Dursleys hated even more than him asking questions, it was his howling about anything acting sus, no matter if it was a dream or a cartoon. They seemed to think he might get sus ideas. It was a wee sunny Saturday, and the zoo was asses and elbows with people. The Dursleys brought Dudley and Pierce some B&J ice cream at the entrance, and then, because the smiling lady in the van asked Harry what he wanted before they could skirt him away, they bought him an off-brand lemon ice pop. It wasn't shitty either, Harry thought, licking it as they peeped a gorilla scratching its head, who looked toads like Dudley, except that it wasn't blonde. Harry had had a dank morning. Something he hadn't had in a long time. He was careful to walk a little ways apart from the Dursleys so that he wouldn't get clocked by Dudley and Pierce, who were starting to get bored of the animals by lunchtime. They ate in a zoo restaurant, and when Dudley had a bitch fit, BC his knickerbocker glory didn't have enough ice cream on top, Uncle Vernon snatched him another one, and Harry was allowed to finish the first. Harry felt, afterward, that he should have known it was all due buzzin' to last. After lunch, they went to the reptile house. It was nippy and dark in there, with lit windows all along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Dudley and Pierce wanted to peep huge, poisonous cobras and yoked man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly finded the largest danger noodle in the crib. It was clearly a bad bitch, and could have wrapped its bod twice around Uncle Vernon's whip and hosed it, but RN, it didn't look like it was feeling it. In fact, it was catching some Z's. Dudley standed with his nose pressed against the glass, digging at the glistening brown coils. Make it move, he boobed at his father. Uncle Vernon tapped on a glass, but the nope rope didn't give a fuck. Do it again, Dudley ordered, 'cause apparently he was too stupid to do it himself. Uncle Vernon rapped the glass smartly with his junky knuckles, but the snack was all good in a hood and slept on. This is boring, Dudley moaned. He shuffled away. Harry skirted in front of the tank and looked intently at the nope rope. His wig would not be snatched if it had died of boredity itself. No besties except dingy people drumming their oily fingers on the glass, trying to spam it all day long. It was worser than having a dumbass cupboard as a bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on a door to wake your ass up. At least he got to peep the rest of the pad. The snack suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly. Slowly. It upped its head until its eyes were on a level with Harry's. It winked. Harry was befuddled. At breakneck speed, he peeped round to see if the rest of the fam was copying this too. They weren't. He peeped back at the snack and winked too. The snack boogied its head toward Uncle Vernon and Dudley, then raised its eyes to the ceiling. The sass was clear. It gave Harry a look that Ops said, "These bitches do that all the time." "Facts," Harry murmured through the class, though he was sus that the snack could actually hear him. "It must be annoying AF." The snack nodded right quick. "Where are you from?" Harry asked. The snack chapped its tail at a little sign next to the glass. Harry squinted at it. "Boa constrictor, Brazil." "Damn! Was it Gucci there?" The note rope chapped its tail again, and Harry read on. This specimen's parents were shipped and was born in the zoo. "Oh, shit. I get you. So you never been to Brazil?" As the snack zigged its head, a loud-ass shout behind Harry snatched both of their wigs. "Dudley! Mr. Dursley! Come and cup a look at the snack! You'll be tripping with what the snack is doing!" Dudley came zooming toward them. "Get out of the way," he said, clocking Harry in the ribs. Shook, Harry fell on the hard-ass concrete floor. What came next happened so lickety-split, everyone was like, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. One sec, Pierce and Dudley were basically groping the glass. The next, they had yeeted back with howls of horror. Harry sat up and was shook. The glass front of the boa constrictor's tank had unappeared. The baddie's neck was uncoiling itself and hauling ass out onto the floor. Bitches throughout the reptile crib were quaking and skirting out the exits. As the snack slid swiftly past him, Harry on guard heard a low, hissing voice say, I'm a head out to Brazil. THX, boyo." The keeper of the reptile dicks was shitting kittens. "But the glass," he kept saying. "Where did the glass go?" The zoo director himself made Aunt Petunia a cup of strong sweet tea while he spammed sorries. Pierce and Dudley could only gibber. Harry was 100p confident that the snack hadn't done shit except clown around, snapping at their heels as it skirted by, but by the time they were back in Uncle Vernon's whip, Dudley was flexing how it had nearly bitten off his leg, while Pierce was capping that it had tried to squeeze him to death. But for sure the worst, for probably only Harry, was Pierce chilling out enough to snitch. Harry was talking to it, right, Harry? Uncle Vernon had a error 404 not found until Pierce was safely out of the crib to start popping off at Harry. He was so pressed he could hardly speak. He managed to say, "Go, cupboard, stay, no grub," before he collapsed into a chair, and Aunt Petunia had to sprint and snatch him a brandy so he could selective amnesia at this event. Harry lay in his emo cupboard forever, manifesting he had a watch. He couldn't suss out what time it was, and couldn't be for show the Dursleys were big snoozing yet. Until they were, he wasn't gonna be put on his ass on a line to snatch some food from the kitchen. He'd been thug-lifing with the Dursleys almost 10 years. 10 trash-ass years, as long as he could remember. Ever since he'd been a baby, and his parentals had unalived in a car crash. He had no memories of being in a whip. Sometimes he big-brained up a sus reality. A flashy flash of green light and a burning pain on his forehead. This, he supposed, was the crash. Though it made no fucking sense for a green light to be involved. He couldn't remember shit about his parents. His aunt and uncle never gossiped about them, and of course, he was gatekept from asking questions. There were no pics of them in the crib. When he had been a youngin', Harry had manifested of some unknown relation showing up and snatching him away, but it never happened. The Dursleys were his only fam. Yet, sometimes he thought, more like manifested, that randoms in the street seemed to know him. Very sus randoms, too. A little man in a violet top hat had bowed to him once while out shopping with Aunt Petunia and Dudley. After interrogating Harry if he knew the man, Aunt Petunia had yeeted them out of the shop without buying anything. A crackhead-looking old woman, dripping in all green, had waved merrily at him on a bus. A cue ball man in a V-long purple coat had actually shaken his hand in the street the other day and then dipped without a word. The sussiest thing about all these people was the way they seemed to vanish the sec Harry tried to get a closer look. At school, Harry had no homies. Everyone knew that Dudley's gang hated that odd Harry Potter in his baggy-ass old clothes and broken glasses. And nobody finna disagreed with Dudley's gang. The escape of the Brazilian boa constrictor got Harry his big-ass bozo yeeted. By the time he was allowed out of his cupboard again, the summer holidays had started, and Dudley had already cracked his new iPhone screen, smashed his gaming laptop playing Fortnite, and, first time out on his racing bike, knocked down old crusty Mrs. Fig as she crossed Privet Drive on her crutches. Harry was glad school was over, but there was no escaping Dudley's crew, who visited the Grib every single day. Pierce, Dennis, Malcolm, and Gordon were all thick AF and stupid. But as Dudley was the thickest and stupidest MF of the lot, he was the leader. The rest of them were all quite happy to join in Dudley's favorite sport, Harry hunting. This was why Harry spent as much time as possible out of the Grib, wandering around and thinking about the end of the holidays, which felt about as long as the first COVID lockdown, where he could see a small ray of hope. When September came, he would be going off to secondary school, and for the first time in his life, he wouldn't be W/Dudley. Dudley had been accepted at Uncle Vernon's old private Tory school, Smeltings. Pierce Polkiss was going there too. Harry, on the other hand, was going to Stonewall High, the local public school. Dudley thought this was well funny. "They stuffed people's heads down the toilet the first day at Stonewall," he told Harry. "Want to come upstairs and practice?" "No, thanks," said Harry. "The poor toilet's never had anything as made as your head in it. It might be triggered." Then he ran, before Dudley's smooth brain could work out what he'd said. One day in July, Aunt Petunia took Dudley to London to buy his Smeltings non-drip scheisse, leaving Harry at Mrs. Fig's. Mrs. Fig wasn't as bad as usual. It turned out she'd broken her leg tripping over one of her cats, and she didn't seem quite as fond of them as before. She let Harry play Fortnite and gave him a bit of chocolate cake that tasted as though she'd had it for several years. It was really quite a sussy, amogus cake. That evening, Dudley paraded around the living room for the family in his brand new uniform. Smelting's boys wore maroon tailcoats, orange knickerbockers, and flat straw hats called boaters. They also carried knobbly sticks used for hitting each other while the teachers weren't looking. This trauma was supposed to be making them stronger for later life. As he looked at Dudley in his new knickerbockers, Uncle Vernon said gruffly that it was the sickest, most swag moment of his life. Aunt Petunia went total QQ and said she couldn't believe it was her ickle Dudleykins. He looked so hot, smexy, and grown up. Harry didn't trust himself to speak. He thought 2 of his ribs might already have cracked from trying not to LMFAO. There was a sus smell in the kitchen the next morning when Harry went in for breakfast. It seemed to be coming from a large metal tub in the sink. He went to have a look. The tub was full of what looked like dirty rags swimming in gray, sussy water. "Ooh, what's this?" he asked Aunt Petunia. Her lips tightened, as they always did, if he dared to ask a question. "Your new school uniform," she said. Harry looked in the bowl again. "Oh," he said. "I didn't realize it had to be so moist." "Don't be so thick," snapped Aunt Petunia. "I'm making art of some of Dudley's old things gray for you. It'll look just like everyone else's when I've finished." Harry Duff doubted this, but Chet was like, probably best to not get more trauma, IG. He sat down at the table and tried a coping mechanism to relieve his depression and anxiety about how he was gonna look on his first day at Stonewall High. Dressed like an old baka, probably. Dudley and Uncle Vernon came in, both with wrinkled noses because of the amogus imposter-like smell from Harry's new uniform. Uncle Vernon opened his Twitter feed as usual, and Dudley banged his melting stick, which he carried everywhere, on the table. They heard the click of the mail slot and flop of letters on a doormat. "Get the mail, Dudley," said Uncle Vernon from behind his iPhone. "Make Harry get it." "Get the mail, Harry." "Make Dudley get it." "Poke him with your smelting stick, Dudley." Harry dodged the smelting stick and went to get the mail. 3 things lay on the doormat: Domino's flyer, a charity bag, and yo, DF? A letter for Harry? There were no bills, as Mr. Dursley had gone paperless, and Aunt March sent him a WhatsApp. Harry picked it up and stared at it, his heart twanging like a giant elastic band. No one, ever, in his whole fucking life, had written to him. Who would? Who sent letters these days? He was lonely and depressed AF. He had no friends, no other fam. He didn't belong to the library, so he'd never even got rude notes asking for books back. Yet here it was, a letter, addressed so plainly there could be no cap. Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. The envelope was chunky, made of crusty, yellowish paper, and the address was written in emerald green ink. There was no stamp or barcode. Turning the envelope over, his hand trembling, Harry saw a fancy AF purple wax seal bearing a coat of arms, a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake, surrounding a large letter H. "Hurry up, boy," shouted Uncle Vernon from the kitchen. "What are you doing? Checking if the letters are cap?" He LMFAO'd at his own joke. Harry went back to the kitchen, still staring at his letter. He handed Uncle Vernon the junk mail and charity bag, sat down, and slowly began to open the yellow envelope. Uncle Vernon looked at the charity bag, cringed in disgust, thinking he was too good for such things. Threw that and the Domino's flyer in the bin. His phone buzzed with a new WhatsApp message. "Marge is sick," he informed Aunt Petunia. "Ate a funny whelk." "Dad," said Dudley suddenly. "Dad, Harry's got something kinda sus." Harry was on the point of unfolding his letter, which was written on the same heavy paper as the envelope, when it was jerked sharply out of his hand by Uncle Vernon. "That's mine," said Harry, trying to snatch it back. "Bet. Who'd be writing you?" sneered Uncle Vernon, shaking the letter open with one hand and glancing at it. His face went from red to green faster than a set of traffic lights, and it didn't stop there. Within seconds, it was the grayish white of old porridge. "Petunia?" he gasped. Dudley tried to grab the letter to read it, but Uncle Vernon held it high out of his reach. Aunt Petunia took it curiously and read the first line. For a moment, it looked as though she might drop dead on the fucking floor. She clutched her throat and made a choking noise. "Vernon! Oh my goodness, Vernon!" They stared at each other. Very, very sussy looks. Seeming to have forgotten that Harry and Dudley were still in the room. Dudley wasn't used to being emotionally abused. He gave his father a sharp tap on the head with his smelting stick. "I want to read that letter," he said loudly. "I want to read it," said Harry furiously. "It's mine." "Get out, you bozos," croaked Uncle Vernon, stuffing the letter back inside its envelope. Harry didn't move. "I want my letter," he shouted. "Let me see it," demanded Dudley. "Out!" roared Uncle Vernon, and he took both Harry and Dudley by the scruffs of their necks and yeeted them into the hall, slamming the kitchen door behind them. Harry and Dudley promptly had a little sissy fight over who would listen at the keyhole. Dudley won, so Harry, his glasses dangling from one ear, lay flat on his stomach to peep through the crack between door and floor. Harry considered venting into the room like the sussy imposter he was, but eventually decided against it. "Vernon," Aunt Petunia was saying in a quivering voice, "look at the address. How could they possibly know where he gets some Z's? You don't think they're watching the crib?" "Watching. Spying. Probably hacked the Alexa. They're listening in on us," muttered Uncle Vernon wildly. "But what should we do, Vernon? Should we write back? Tell him we don't want?" Harry could see Uncle Vernon's shiny, drippy black shoes pacing up and down the kitchen. "No," he said finally. "No, we'll ghost them. If they don't get an answer. Yes, that's best. We won't do anything." "But I'm not having one in my crib, Petunia. Didn't we swear when we took him in, with gatekeep, that dangerous nonsense?" That evening when he got back from adulting for money, Uncle Vernon did something he'd never done before. He visited Harry in his cupboard. "Where's my letter?" said Harry, the moment Uncle Vernon had squeezed through the door. "Who's writing me?" "No one. It was spam mail," said Uncle Vernon shortly. "I have burned it." "It was not spam mail," said Harry angrily. "It had my cupboard on it." "Silence!" yelled Uncle Vernon, and a couple of spiders fell from the ceiling. He took a few deep breaths and then forced his face into a smile, which looked quite painful. Yes, Harry. About this cupboard. Your aunt and I have been thinking. You're really getting a bit chunky for it. We think it might be nice if you moved into Dudley's second bedroom. Why? Said Harry. Don't ask questions, snapped his uncle. Take this stuff upstairs, RN. The Dursleys' crib had 4 bedrooms. One for Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia, one for visitors, usually Uncle Vernon's sis, Marge, one where Dudley slept, and one where Dudley kept all the toys and things that wouldn't fit into his first bedroom. It only took Harry 1 trip upstairs to move everything he owned from the cupboard to his room. He sat down on the bed and stared around him. Nearly everything in here was broken. The broken PlayStation 4 was lying on top of a Minecraft Lego set Dudley had given up on making. In the corner was Dudley's first ever television set, only 40 inches, which he'd put his foot through when his favorite program had been cancelled. There was a large bird cage which had once held a parrot that Dudley had swapped at school for an anime sword, which was up on a shelf with the end all bent because Dudley had sat on it. Other shelves were full of books. They were the only things in the room that looked as though they'd never been touched. From downstairs came the sound of Dudley throwing a temper tantrum at his mother. I don't want him in there. I need that room. Make him get out. Harry sighed and stretched out on a bed. Yesterday, he'd have given anything to be up here. Today, he'd rather be back in his cupboard with that letter than up here without it. Next morning at breakfast, everyone accidentally muted their mics. Dudley was being a little bozo. He screamed, being sick on purpose, then did some goofy anime moves on Joe Mama and yeeted his tortoise through the greenhouse roof. And he still didn't have his room back. Harry was thinking about this time yesterday and bitterly wishing he'd opened the letter in the hall. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia kept looking at each other darkly. When the mail arrived, Uncle Vernon, who seemed to be trying to be nice to Harry, made Dudley go and get it. They heard him banging things with his smelting stick all the way down the hall. Then he shouted, There's another one! Mr. Harry Potter, the smallest bedroom, 4 private tribe. With a strangled cry, Uncle Vernon leapt from his seat, and Naruto ran down the hall, Harry right behind him. Uncle Vernon had to wrestle Dudley to the ground to get the letter from him, which was made difficult by the fact that Harry had grabbed Uncle Vernon around the neck from behind. After a minute of confused fighting, in which everyone got hit a lot by the smelting stick, Uncle Vernon straightened up, gasping for breath, with Harry's letter clutched in his hand. Go to your cupboard. Your bedroom, he wheezed at Harry. Dudley, go. Just go. Harry walked round and round in his new room. Someone knew he had moved out of his cupboard, and they seemed to know he hadn't received his first letter. Surely that meant they'd try again? And this time he'd make sure they didn't fail. He had a plan. Boom. They knocked again. Dudley jerked awake. Where's the cannon? He said stupidly, in a smooth brain fashion. There was a crash behind them, and Uncle Vernon came skidding into the room. He was holding a rifle in his hands. Now they knew what had been in the long, thin package, that's what she said, he had brought with them. Who's there? He shouted. I'm armed, and I'm majorly triggered. There was a pause. Then, smash. The door was yeeted clean off its hinges and with a deafening crash landed flat on the floor. A giant of a man was standing in the doorway. His face was almost completely hidden by a hot mess of hair and a wild, tangled beard, but you could make out his eyes, glinting like black beetles under all the hair. The giant squeezed his way into the hut, getting low so that his head just brushed the ceiling. He bent down, picked up the door, and fitted it easily back into its frame. The noise of the storm outside dropped a little. He turned to look at them all. Couldn't make us a cup of tea, could you? It's not been an easy journey. He strode over to the sofa where Dudley sat frozen with fear. Budge up, you great lump, said the stranger. Dudley squeaked and ran to hide behind his mother, who was crouching, terrified, behind Uncle Vernon. And here's Harry, said the giant. Harry looked up into the fierce, wild, shadowy face and saw that the beetle eyes were crinkled in a smile. Last time I saw you, you was only a baby, said the giant. You look a lot like your dad, but you got your mom's eyes. Uncle Vernon made a funny, rasping noise. I demand that you leave at once, sir, he said, clearly triggered. You're breaking and entering. Ah, shut up, Dursley, you great prune, said the giant. He reached over the back of the sofa, jerked the gun out of Uncle Vernon's hands, bent it into a knot as easily as if it had been made of rubber, and threw it into a corner of the room. Uncle Vernon made another funny noise, like a mouse being trodden on. No more caroning for him. Anyway, Harry, said the giant, turning his back on the Dursleys in hot girl fashion. A very happy birthday to you. Got something here for you. I might have sat on it at some point, but it'll taste all right. From an inside pocket of his black overcoat, he pulled a slightly squashed box. Harry opened it with scared fingers. Inside was a large, sticky chocolate cake with Happy Birthday, Harry written on it in green icing. Harry looked up at the giant. He meant to say thank you, but a smooth brain moment had him saying, Who are you? The giant chuckled. True. I haven't introduced myself. Rubus Hagrid, keeper of keys and crowns at Hogwarts. He held out an enormous hand and shook Harry's whole arm. What about that tea, then, eh? He said, rubbing his hands together. I not say no, it's some stronger, if you got it, mind. His eyes fell on the empty grate with the shriveled chip bags in it, and he snorted. He bent down over the fireplace. They couldn't see what he was doing, but when he drew back a second later, there was a thick fire there. It filled the whole damp hut with flickering light, and Harry felt the warmth wash over him as though he'd sunk into a hot bath. The giant sat back down on the sofa, which sagged under his weight, and began taking all sorts of things out of the pockets of his coat. A copper kettle, a squashy package of sausages, a poker, a teapot, several chipped mugs, and a bottle of some amber liquid that he took a swig from before starting to make tea. Soon, the hut was full of the sound and smell of sizzling sausage. Nobody said a thing while the giant was working, but as he slid the first 6 fat, juicy, slightly burnt sausages from the poker, Dudley fidgeted a little. Uncle Vernon said sharply, Don't touch anything he gives you, Dudley. The giant chuckled darkly. Your great budding of a son don't need fattening anymore, Dursley. Chill. He passed the sausages to Harry, who was so hungry he had never tasted anything so wonderful. But he still couldn't take his eyes off the giant. Finally, as nobody seemed about to explain anything, he said, I'm sorry, but I still don't really know who you are. The giant took a gulp of tea and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Call me Hagrid, he said. Everyone does. And like I told you, I'm keeper of keys at Hogwarts. You'll know all about Hogwarts, of course. No, said Harry. Hagrid looked shocked. My bee, said Harry quickly. You're a bee, barked Hagrid, turning to stare at the Dursleys, who shrank back into the shadows. It's them should be sorry. I knew you weren't getting your letters, but I never thought you wouldn't even know about Hogwarts, for crying out loud. Did you never wonder where your parents learned their shit? What shit? Asked Harry. What shit? Hagrid thundered. Now let him cook. He had leapt to his feet. Boy was angry. No cap. The Dursleys were triggered against the wall. Do you mean to tell me,
he growled at the Dursleys, that this boy knows nothing about anything.
Harry thought this was going a bit far. He had been to school, after all, and his marks weren't bad.
I know some things, he said. I can, do math and stuff.
But Hagrid simply waved his hand and said,
About our world, I mean. Your world, my world, your parents' world. What world?
Hagrid looked as if he was about to explode.
Dursley, he boomed.
Uncle Vernon, who had gone very pale, whispered something that sounded like Mimblewimble. Hagrid stared wildly at Harry.
But you must know about your mom and dad, he said. I mean, they're famous. You're famous.
What? My mom and dad weren't famous, were they?
You don't know. You don't know.
Hagrid ran his fingers through his hair, fixing Harry with a bewildered stare.
You don't know what you are?
He said finally. Uncle Vernon suddenly found his voice.
Stop, he commanded. Stop right there, sir. I forbid you to tell the boy anything.
A braver man than Vernon Dursley would have quailed under the furious look Hagrid now gave him. When Hagrid spoke, his every syllable trembled with rage.
You never told him? Never told him what was in the letter Dumbledore left for him. I was there. I saw Dumbledore leave it, Dursley. And you've kept it from him all these years?
Kept what from me? Said Harry eagerly.
Stop. I forbid you,
yelled Uncle Vernon in panic, and Petunia gave a gasp of horror.
Go boil your heads, both of you, said Hagrid. Harry, you're a wizard.
Harry was on his Sigma grind set and woke up hella early the next morning. He knew it was light outside, but kept his eyes closed. That ish was a dream, he said to himself. I was deaf high-key dripping off that, 'cause ain't no way a giant named Hagrid told me I was going to a school for wizards. When I open my eyes, I'll be back at the crib in that crusty cupboard. There was suddenly a loud tapping noise. And there's Aunt Petunia knocking on the door, Harry thought, his vibe sinking. Low-key, it had been a fire sesh. Tap, tap, tap. Chill, Harry mumbled. I'm getting up. He sat up, and Hagrid's heavy coat fell off him. The hut was full of sunlight. The storm was over. Hagrid was zooted on the ghetto couch, and there was an owl hitting its claw on the window, a boomer newspaper held in its beak. Harry skirted off the ground, so pumped he felt like he was floating on that Zaza. Bro straight up went and yeeted that window open. The owl flew over and started going all goblin mode on Hagrid's coat. Ayo, chill with that. Harry tried to pawn that little MF, but homie was having none of that and was pissed AF. Hagrid, said Harry loudly, there's an owl.
Pay him,
Hagrid grunted into the sofa. What?
Buddy's trying to cop the bag for delivering the paper. Look in the pockets.
Hagrid's coat seemed to be made of nothing but pockets. Bunches of keys, slug pellets, balls of string, peppermint humbugs, tea bags. Finally, Harry pulled out a handful of whack-looking coins.
Give him 5 knuts,
said Hagrid sleepily. Bruh. Knuts?
The little bronze ones.
Harry counted out 5 little bronze coins, and the owl held out his leg so Harry could put the dough into a small leather pouch tied to it. Homie zoomed out the window as soon as he copped that bread. Hagrid yawned loudly, sat up and stretched.
We got a dip, Harry. Lots to do today. Gotta get up to London and cop all your school shit and stuff.
Harry was turning over the wizard coins and looking at them. Bro just thought of something that totally killed the vibe. Hagrid?
Sup?
said Hagrid, who was pulling on his huge off-white boots. I'm broke AF, and you heard Uncle V last night? Ain't no way Buddy's dropping a dime. Bro's stingy for real.
No worries. Do you think your parents got no stacks? They got those bends for cheap.
But didn't their crib get clapped?
No way. No way they keep the paper in the house for the ops. Lil' bro? Nah. We finna stop at Gringotts. Stat. Wizard's Bank. Grab a glizzy. They're not bad cold. Plus, that birthday cake's still buzzing.
Wizards have banks?
Just one. Gringotts. Run by goblins.
Harry dropped the bit of glizzy he was holding. Goblins?
Yeah. So you'd be trippin' to try and rob them, no cap. Never mess with goblins, Harry. Gringotts is the safest place in the world. For anything you want to keep safe. Except maybe Hogwarts. Matter of fact, I need to hit up Gringotts anyways. For my boy, Dumbledore. Some Hogwarts shit.
Hagrid puffed himself up.
My bro got me doing hella important-ish. Picking your ass up. Grabbing that ish from Gringotts. But he knows I got his back.
Hagrid flexed on Harry.
So, you chill to go?
Harry followed Hagrid out onto the rock. The weather was hella nice, and the ocean looked all naturey. The boat Uncle V copped was still chilling where they'd left it, but it had tons of water in after the storm. How'd you get here? Harry asked, looking around for another boat.
Flew,
said Hagrid. Flew?
Yeah, but we'll go back in this. Not supposed to use magic, now's I've got you.
They sat down in a boat, Harry staring at Hagrid, trying to imagine him flying.
Low-key, though. Rowing would be hella lame,
said Hagrid, giving Harry another of his sideways looks.
But you're not gonna snitch, are you?
Nah, bro, I got you, said Harry, trying to cop a glimpse of more magic.